Our second reading is a continuation of the first reading. It also comes out of Luke's Gospel in the 6th chapter. It doesn't say exactly, but we can guess it's probably a week, maybe 2 weeks later, after the first instance where Jesus does something on the Sabbath, causes concern to the religious leaders, and now he's going to do something else on the Sabbath that's going to cause a whole new controversy, which is something that we'll dig into as readers 20 or so centuries later and see how it still applies and opens up who Jesus is and who we are called to be. I'll read from Luke chapter 6, verses 6 to 16. On another Sabbath, Jesus entered the synagogue and he taught. Now there was a man there whose right hand was withered. Scribes and the Pharisees, they watched Jesus to see whether he was going to cure on the Sabbath so that they might find an accusation against him. Even though Jesus knew what the scribes and the Pharisees were thinking, he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come, stand here." The man got up and stood there, and then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to destroy it?" After looking around at all of them, he said to them, "Stretch out your hand." The man did so, and his hand was immediately restored. But they, the scribes and the Pharisees, were filled with fury, and they discussed with one another, "What are we going to do with this Jesus?" Now during those days, Jesus went out to the mountain to pray. He spent the whole night, in prayer to God, and when day came, he called his disciples, and he chose 12 of them, whom he also named apostles: Simon, whom he named Peter, and his brother Andrew, and James and John, and Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, and James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who was sometimes called the Zealot, and Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who would become the traitor. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Bruce Feiler, you may know him. He's a well-known author. He is one of my favorite authors, and he wrote one of my top 3 favorite books called The Secrets of Happy Families. The subtitle is this: Improve Your Mornings, Rethink Family Dinners, Fight Smarter, Go Out and Play, and much, much more. Don't you like that add-on, the much, much more? You have to read to figure out what the much more is. Bruce is a writer. He wrote a book long ago about walking the steps of Abraham. He's written about politics, religion, culture, and history, tackling some of the hardest subjects we know. But then he and his wife had twins, and that proved to be his hardest assignment, he says. So he went looking for answers. He didn't want to go to books or to articles. That wasn't the way that he liked to do journalism. He liked to talk to the actual people, to the real experts, as he called them. Makes you feel good that you're known as an expert. If you're a parent, you can pat yourself on the back. The opening chapter is Bruce visiting the Stars, who live in Boise, Idaho. There are 4 kids. They're ranging in age from 10 to 15 with 2 parents. Bruce visited their house at 6 a.m. on Monday morning, what many of us might consider the most hectic and the hardest morning of the week. He sat in awe, he said, as he watched the 2 oldest kids come from downstairs. He was sitting in the kitchen, and they looked at a list that was on the refrigerator. They went and did something. They came back to the list that was on the refrigerator, and they did one more thing. They went back to the list, ate breakfast, went back to the list, got their backpacks packed. At one point, the mom came downstairs and said, "Good morning, Bruce. Good morning, kids." Poured herself a cup of coffee, sat down on the recliner, and didn't say a word to the kids other than, "I hope you have a wonderful day." Now, I know we're about to award Oscars to some very deserving actresses and actors, but I think these parents should win something. Bruce did as well, and he asked him, "What's your secret?" It turns out this family was using what's called agility development. Really, that's just fancy talk for having rules, but knowing that they can change based on different circumstances. The Starr family implemented agility development because the kids, when asked, what's your favorite thing about mom and dad and what's the worst thing about mom and dad, said, mom just yells. Do you want to say anything more? Nope, mom just yells. She grew tired of hearing that, and they grew tired of nagging. We don't ever worry about that, do we? And the dad, who worked as a software engineering firm, said, we use agility development at work, and she was desperate. Bring it home, honey. We need to create some lists for these kids to use. The lists then became these guides that the kids used to complete the necessary task of just getting them out the door. You know what I'm talking about, right? At first, mom and dad became broken records, and they said they just pointed to the list. Check the list. Check the list. Check the list. But after 2 weeks, they said the kids were operating on their own. They were completing tasks. Mom got her coffee in peace, and dad was able to walk out the door without a hitch. I know what you're thinking. Is this what the kingdom of heaven looks like? For parents of little ones or even older ones, I would imagine this is a beacon of hope for what could be, right? This is when we wonder if Matthew and Luke missed one of the Beatitudes that Jesus shared at the Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on the Plain that said this: blessed are the families who use agility development, for their households will be manageable on Monday mornings. No, friends, that line is not there, but we wish it was. It turns out at the core of agility development, there are rules and tasks. People have to do certain things in order for the whole system to work. If the older kids don't do what they're supposed to do, the younger kids can't do what they're supposed to do. I don't know that we've ever called it agility development, but the laws from Leviticus and Deuteronomy function in that way. So do the commandments that Jesus is going to give us: to love one another as I have loved you, to welcome each other, to visit each other in prison, give your coat to one who needs one, and feed the hungry. These all keep order, and they allow each of us to function well within the system. That is, until an aberration emerges. Like a man who shows up on the Sabbath, a man who has a withered hand. See, a person with a deformity wasn't considered whole by Jewish standards. There are texts, we can actually read them in Scripture, that argue that a deformity, there's a reason for it. It's a sign that God hadn't blessed you. It was a sign that you were a sinner. Or it was a physical sign that God was punishing your family. Remember those texts where God will love you to the nth generation, but will punish you to the third or to the fourth. It could also mean that you came from the wrong town or the wrong country. That's why your hand was withered. We don't know anything more about this man with a withered hand in our story, other than he was in the synagogue on the Sabbath on the same day that Jesus and the Pharisees were in the midst of a contest. There's the build-up to this scene in the synagogue. In the previous story, Jesus and his disciples have picked grain on the Sabbath, and when he's questioned by the Pharisees, he has this great response that keeps them quiet. He references the story of King David, and when you reference King David, it sort of shuts down the conversation. In essence, Jesus acknowledges, yes, we did break the rules. We broke the law, but we had a good reason to. We were like King David on this one. The tension's building. The Pharisees know that they are angry with Jesus, but they can't really catch him quite yet. What's odd is that to pluck grain and then to rub it between your fingers was considered work and harvest according to Jewish tradition. It's kind of a small thing, isn't it? But to heal a man in the synagogue is quite another. This is big, this is expressive, this is public. The stakes are higher in the second Sabbath story. That man with the withered hand is there. Will he or won't he be healed? It's almost as if we go to commercial break. Those 2 minutes and 22 seconds where we wonder, is Jesus going to do this? If Jesus heals the man, if he does not heal the man, then he loses all power and authority. He hands it back over to the Pharisees and the scribes. He submits to them, you are the authorities. I will back away. Now, if he does heal the man, though, then he's breaking one of the 10 commandments again, and he's doing so in one of the most sacred spaces in all of Jewish tradition. So will he or won't he break the commandment? We come back from commercial break and we realize it was never about the commandment for Jesus. It's not about rules. It's not about laws. It's not about agility development. It's about a person. And it's about a larger community. The man with the withered hand is just that. He's a man with a deformity. But he's also so much more. He's a refugee who is seeking wholeness because her homeland is being destroyed. It's a young person seeking acceptance as he struggles to understand who he is. It's a child who's in need of a loving family beyond his biological family because they just can't fulfill that responsibility right now. It's a church member, it's one of us who needs a hug or a shoulder to lean on because anything else would be unbelievably crushing. It was never about the commandments for Jesus. Bruce Feeler and his wife attempted to use and utilize agility development with their children. He raced home after being with the stars and told his wife, "I have figured everything out." They implemented the same system that worked for the stars, but it didn't work for them. See, there was one problem. They weren't the stars. Because you can't just take one system and place it in another system within a new context and hope that it just works. Context matters. People matter. Relationships matter. This muddies the water, yes, but it requires our attention. Bruce's family, as he talks about, had to rearrange how they used the system. There were only 2 kids and they were much younger, so they had to use different means of implementing the system. But at its core, at its base, the aim was to create a loving community where all are needed. Not just a well-oiled machine that allows mom and dad to sip coffee while the children do the hard work, although that is a nice result. It's about paying attention to the man with the withered hand because something's not right with our system. His hand prevents him from being fully included in society. The man with the withered hand can't work. He's probably not welcomed by his family. He's probably at the synagogue on the Sabbath because he knows other people are going to be there that day and he can ask for a handout. Now, the truth is, I'm making all of this up and basing it on hunches and clues from the text. We don't know this. The best thing to do would be to ask the man. Granted, there are about 20 centuries of time that prevent us from actually talking to him. But we can see the refugees in our midst, can't we? We can see the young people who need our love. We can see the children who would benefit from the love that we as a church can provide. And we know that one person who could use a hug and the love that we can give. The man with the withered hand is here. In fact, he's everywhere. We might be him. So when one of us isn't included in the community, something's not right and it's not whole. That's what Jesus is pointing out the day that he enters the synagogue on the Sabbath. This story is about the Sabbath. It's about the synagogue. It's about the Pharisees. It's about the religious leaders. It's about the devoted ones who were there. It's about those who are there because they're seeking something. It's actually about all of that and how they are deeply connected. And when one of those pieces isn't whole, the system is in need of repair. In just a little bit, you're going to hear a report about the proposed budget for 2017. It isn't perfect, despite the perfect people who helped put it together. And here's why it's not perfect. Because it requires more than our checkbooks and our stock options. We are more than the money we collect and also the money we spend. We are more than what we do on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights, during the mission trips and at Montreat. We are more than the program schedule that you can read on our wonderful website or in the messenger that you receive in the mail. You are more than what we will see on bulletin boards. We're a community. Look around. We are a community of individuals who are trying to make room for one more, and then another, and then another, and then another. We do have rules. We are a community of individuals who have rules and traditions, but we also know that aberrations are going to show up and exist, and we're going to have to address them. There is not a scientific method to being the church. It's more like being an artist. I had never thought of that. I've never called myself an artist. But when I was together with some pastors 2 weeks ago while working on my doctorate, we were out eating dinner, and one of the waiters came over. This is a group of all pastors sitting there. We were laughing and joking, trying to decide what to eat. And the waiter said, "What do you all do for a living?" "We're artists," someone said. The rest of us were sort of shocked at his answer, but he said it with such confidence that we didn't really know how to respond. The waiter left. And we all looked at him and were like, "What were you doing?" We know that pastors are prone to extend the truth, as we say, about what we do when we don't want people to know that we're an actual pastor, because that invites one of three responses. One, people tell you everything about their lives, and we only want to get a haircut or read on the plane. Two, people will tell us how bad the church is and how mean God is, and we only want to get a quick bite to eat or get our car washed. Or people say this, "You don't look like a pastor," and that makes us self-conscious, as if something's wrong with us. So we assumed our friend was deflecting. He wasn't. He explained to us, "Turns out we are all artists. You are as well." He said, "We're painting or drawing or playing and performing our interpretations of what we read in Scripture and what we find in the revelations that God gives each of us. We're not called to be scientists who put it into one book, who name it, test it, conclude the issues of our lives of faith. It's never that neat and fixed. Instead, we're called to live in a community of faith that includes a wonderful set of rules that guide us, and then we're called to respond to the aberrations that show up and cause us to see not everything or everyone is whole. That means that we do something different. In those moments, we see that it was never about the commandments. It was about the people and the relationships that display Christ to the world. It was never about the commandments alone. It was about the person and the people and the relationships and Jesus' desire to make the community of God whole. May God bless this witness, and may God bless this congregation. Amen.